These are sidecar races, a real madness, are three-wheeled motorcycles that can reach 160 km per hour in the residential streets of the Isle of Man. But the most curious thing is that it takes two people to drive them, one piloting and the other managing the balance of the vehicle and controlling it at that speed with walls, curbs, and blind corners must be terrifying, especially for the non-driver. So today, we are going to explain the engineering and the incredible driving skill behind sidecar racing. This is a Formula 2 sidecar with around 130 horsepower, 350 kg including the two riders and a top speed of over 260 km per hour. They run on standard 4-stroke, 600 cubic centimeter motorcycle engines with racing slicks. The speed at which they go is spectacular. Sidecar racing is brutal with many different categories from circuits such as Brands Hatch and Alton Park to the most terrifying of all, the Isle of Man Snuffle Mountain Circuit or Isle of Man Tourist Trophy. It is statistically the most dangerous race in the world, and by far the number of terrible accidents is endless, but despite this hundreds of motorcycle and sidecar riders show up every year to take on the challenge. Although we often complain that nowadays circuits are made too safe with large asphalt loopholes, the risks in the Tourist Trophy are much higher than I personally would run. A miscalculation or mechanical failure could send you off a cliff or simply burst into a brick wall. The track winds through narrow island roads for 60 km with narrow sections, and other more open or intertwined sections where riders spend several minutes practically flat out. These sidecars drive an average of 193 km per hour through these 200 curves. To put this in context, the top superbike class, which is much lighter and averages 210 km per hour, is a time attack or time trial that takes place over 15 days divided into a week of training where they take advantage of every minute and another week for the races. The riders start 10 seconds apart. So while you're racing against the clock, if you're fast you also have to make some not so easy overtakes. If you want to see images of the race you can consult the channel Free Willing OTRI Hewland, where they provide a lot of graphic material and from which we have nourished for this video. This track would already be terrifying in a car with 4 wheels, a roll cage, a driver and the ability to take left and right turns at the same kind of speed. But sidecars don't have any of those things. Before we get into a bit of jargon. The sidecar itself is called an assembly, the person on the right is called a rider, and the crazy person who gets out is called a passenger. However, from an engineering perspective, what makes these sidecars so unusual is that they are not symmetrical. They have 2 wheels in line and then another one on one of the sides. When you race cars, whether in touring cars, GTs or single-seaters, you have an idea of the turning ability of the vehicle that applies to both left and right. However, these sidecars actually take right turns much faster than left turns, and that set does support the extra sidecar wheel, while on left turns it tends to want to tip over. Years ago, these assemblies used to look more like a motorcycle with a sidecar, however now they are custom racing parts with advanced aerodynamics, much improved performance. They are driven by a single rear wheel behind the rider, and are steered by the front wheel through very small handlebars. They can also outperform superbikes, thanks to huge slick tires and huge car brakes that stop all 3 wheels. Look at this, deflated racing tires instead of round motorcycle tires, so they have much larger contact patches and that gives them more grip in corners and especially in braking. And now the question you're probably all asking yourself, what about the guy in the back? Well, they are called passengers or more informally monkeys, and the truth is that it makes a lot of sense. These guys have to be incredibly fit to withstand those speeds and G-forces. Their function is to maintain the balance of the assembly. Without them the sidecar simply would not work. It would be several minutes per lap slower on this circuit. The so-called passengers hold on as best they can by staying out of the airflow on the straights and then hanging on both sides in the corners, which basically compensates for the imbalance of the weights in the sidecar. On the right-hand corners they climb over the rider to keep the weight and tires inside, then on the left-hand corners they hang precariously over the side of the bike, and this is the part that looks really dangerous and difficult. They often even slide with their backs on the track surface and even fall if the rider makes a mistake. Along the straight, they hide so as not to brake with the air, then appear in the braking zone to add as much air resistance as possible, and when the rider turns into the corner they have to get into position carefully but quickly so that the bike grips steadily. In cars a regressive braking is done. I'll explain it to you. Brake pressure is gently released when entering curves in order to transfer the weight as smoothly as possible. But in a sidecar, while the rider is doing the same thing, the passenger is also moving. It must be very difficult to coordinate the two perfectly. Some passengers even count seconds or remember the bumps on the track. anything to avoid having to look out and see how far it is to the next turn, which is impressive considering that the lap lasts 60 km, 37 miles. As you can imagine, if you need a huge confidence on both sides, the pilot has to trust that the passenger will be in the right place to give him the necessary grip at all times, and the passenger for his part has to trust that the pilot makes the correct estimates of line and speed. Passengers are held by specific hand grips. The main one is in the center of the bike. They are caught on this or through the faster areas as well as under braking, which means they have to be quite high up on the bike while the rider rests on the foot pegs. There are also other smaller grips around the sidecar for the cornering sections, as well as a special platform with places for the passenger to rest their foot to really hold on. It's like climbing walls at 150 mph. What also seems crazy is what the driver has to do is not like a car where the grip is more predictable and the balance of the car is quite stable. The biggest change comes when the tires wear out or the fuel is burning, and honestly both things happen slowly and predictably, but not in these vehicles. If the passenger is not exactly in the right place at the right time, the bike will not have the expected grip. So there are really two people driving these sidecars, and the most beastly thing is the huge risk taken by each rider. In fact, many of them have rituals where they hug their families every time they get on the bike for this ride, even for training. There are too many accidents, many of which are tragic, so you can imagine the nerves they have when they sit on the starting line, but as we all know, motorsports are dangerous and are practiced knowing the risks. The skill, composure, and dedication of all these pilots demands great respect. One curious thing we didn't know was how they get to race this, where they learn to hang off the side of the sidecar at those speeds. Well, just as karting is the base or school for single-seaters, sidecars also have their miniature versions. They are called Sidecars Mini F1 and they run in karting circuits. The races are great, with hard fights, and there you can clearly see how the passengers move the weight by positioning themselves on the inside of each curve and hanging off the side of the set. And that's all for today, friends. If you want, you can leave me in the comments what interests you in the world of motoring and we can talk about it.